There have been question marks over the Biden presidency from the very, very beginning. His fitness for office was never questioned by the mainstream media, and that's despite the falls, despite the campaigning from his basement and the regular gaffes. And nor did the legacy media probe too deeply into how Joe Biden managed to become very, very wealthy, despite being a salaried politician for almost all of his adult life. Authorities also covered up the obvious crimes of his crack-smoking son Hunter, with national security officers actually declaring the evidence on his abandoned laptop as being Russian disinformation. It was blatantly dishonest, it was deceptive conduct, and it was all designed to protect a man so he could reassume high office and the swamp creatures could all keep the crooked money flowing into their pockets.
But we obviously have to talk about the elephant in the room for just a moment. The president that you are running to unseat is potentially being impeached for trying to sabotage your campaign. How does one deal with that, Mr. Vice President?
With the truth. You know, there's not one single solitary legitimate outfit here or abroad that indicates there's anything remotely reasonable to what he's suggesting.
The president said, quote, and again, he said this without providing, as you pointed out, providing any evidence of wrongdoing, but he said, quote, Biden and his son are stone cold crooked.
Joe Biden and his son are corrupt.
Biden and his son are stone cold crooked.
Look, Biden and his son are stone cold crooked, and you know it. His son walks out with millions of dollars. The kid knows nothing. You know it, and so do we. Go ahead, ask a question.
But the question, sir, was what did you want President Zelensky to do about Vice President Biden and his son Hunter?
Are you talking to me?
I just wanted to follow up on the one that I asked.
Did you hear
what
me?
Did you want
Did you
him
hear
to
me? It's a whole hoax. And you know who's playing into the hoax? People like you and the fake news media that we have in this country. And I say in many cases, the corrupt media, because you're corrupt. Much of the media in this country is not just fake, it's corrupt.
Now, President Trump is again insisting today that reporters should dig into a widely discredited, we need to emphasize that, this is widely discredited, a conspiracy theory involving Joe Biden, Ukraine, and a Ukrainian prosecutor that he helped get fired.
There is zero evidence of any assertion being made. He's the issue. Nobody has ever asserted that I did anything wrong except he and, what's that fellow's name, Rudy Hootie, or whatever his name, Giuliani. That's it.
But what he said is that he wouldn't give, I think it was billions of dollars to Ukraine unless they fired the prosecutor who was looking at his son and his son's company, the company that his son worked with. And that's a very dishonest thing.
The accusations President Trump is making against Joe Biden have been widely debunked. Now, this story involves three main players: Joe Biden, his son Hunter, and a man who was the top prosecutor in Ukraine named Viktor Shokin. Back in 2016, Hunter Biden was working for a natural gas company in Ukraine, and Shokin was investigating its owner. But the U.S. and several Western allies did not think Shokin was doing enough to clean up corruption in Ukraine. So then Vice President Biden went to Ukraine. He threatened to withhold U.S. aid $1 billion worth if Shokin was not fired, because the United States didn't want to give money to a country that would be squandered by a corrupt government.
I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, what, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
Now, Shokin was fired. President Trump claims Vice President Biden's ultimatum there is the real crime here, but there's no evidence of that. In fact, PolitiFact and The Washington Post both investigated this claim, and they found no wrongdoing on the part of Vice President Biden.
There is zero evidence of any assertion being made.
Joe Biden used at least 3 pseudonyms or fake names in emails that he was receiving from people within the federal government, people that worked for him. He was receiving emails pertaining to Ukraine. His son Hunter was copied on them.
When he demanded that Shokin be fired, he was acting on behalf of the U.S. government and our allies, including Europe, who wanted the same outcome.
Abuse of power. That is the blunt message that is being delivered in crystal clear terms from a fired-up Joe Biden to a Fox News reporter who was asking him about the debunked conspiracy theory that is being pushed by the president that involves Biden, Biden's son, and Ukraine.
So earlier today, he did talk to the media about these unfounded claims about him and his son. There is no evidence to these claims.
Mr. Vice President, how many times have you ever spoken to your son about his overseas business dealings?
I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings. And he's using the abuse of power and every element of the presidency to try to do something to smear me. Everybody looked at this, and everybody's looked at it and said there's nothing there. Ask the right question.
Okay, this also pertains to the firing of the special prosecutor in Ukraine, Viktor Shokin. Was that what these emails were about? Because you have told us in the past that that was one decision you were looking at as far as a decision that Joe Biden may have been paid for to get involved in getting that prosecutor off the back of Burisma.
I think the evidence is mounting every day to prove that Joe Biden went to Ukraine for the sole purpose of firing Shokin, who was the Ukrainian prosecutor who was investigating his son for corruption.
The real story here, it's a serious real story, is that Donald Trump has made yet another attempt, or really a demand in this case, to collude with a foreign power. This time it's Ukraine. Trump is withholding hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid if and until such time as Ukraine smears Joe Biden in order to help Trump win re-election in 2020.
This is corruption, bribery, money laundering in plain sight. These aren't trumped-up charges, but no pun intended, like you're seeing against the former president. These are actually things that happened while he was in office, leveraging his position to enrich himself and his family. There's evidence is coming out, whether it's the suspicious activity reports that Representative Comer has brought out. All the pieces of the puzzle are coming together that show that Joe Biden, in fact, did do all these things. And bribery and these types of actions are actually criminal, and they're also impeachable.
As Ukraine smears Joe Biden in order to help Trump.
Well, what we've now learned is Joe Biden was using a fake email name to receive correspondence from his staff that he was copying Hunter Biden on. This is obvious that Joe Biden abused his power as vice president for the sole purpose to protect his son, who was receiving millions and millions of dollars from this corrupt Ukrainian energy company. And this email ties Joe Biden and Hunter Biden into this corruption scheme without a shadow of a doubt.
Nobody has ever asserted that I did anything wrong.
The Biden family were receiving payments from bad people in bad countries around the world. And what we've been trying to do is figure out why. Why in the world would the Biden family receive over $20 million from foreign nationals around the world? And this is evidence to show that Joe Biden was communicating with his son. He was making sure that his son knew he was on his way to Ukraine. Remember, the timeline of these emails show that Joe Biden was en route from Washington to Ukraine for the sole purpose of withholding foreign aid to Ukraine in exchange for firing the prosecutor. And we know that happened, and we know Joe Biden accepted credit for it. He did an interview where he said, well, son of a bee, they fired the prosecutor before I got on the plane and left Ukraine.
If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
Joe Biden, in his own words, said that. So now we have evidence that Joe Biden and his administration was communicating with Hunter Biden. They knew Hunter Biden was affiliated with Ukraine. That's another lie, Maria. Joe Biden said he didn't even know Hunter was on the Burisma board for a long time.
Hunter Biden, your son, was getting paid a lot of money to serve on the board of a Ukrainian energy company facing serious corruption charges. You were the vice president running point on Ukraine. The average Joe hears that and says, that sounds fishy. What's your understanding of what your son was doing for an extraordinary amount of money?
I don't know what he was doing. I know he was on the board. I found out he was on the board after he was on the board, and that was it.
This is another lie. They were copying Hunter, and the only emails we've seen where they were copying Hunter were pertaining to Ukraine at a critical time when Joe Biden was going there to fire the prosecutor in exchange for foreign aid. That's called a quid pro quo, Maria, and that's very illegal, and it's more evidence that Joe Biden was front and center in this influence peddling scheme.
There's also no evidence that Shokin's investigation into the gas company was targeting Hunter Biden, something else that President Trump has falsely claimed.
Former Ukrainian prosecutor Viktor Shokin says President Biden got him fired while he was trying to investigate the family's alleged criminal activities.
And that was it. Why were you fired from your position by President Poroshenko?
I have said repeatedly in my previous interviews that Poroshenko fired me at the insistence of the then Vice President Biden because I was investigating Burisma.
Why were you looking into Burisma?
Because Hunter Biden was involved with Burisma. And
there's also no evidence that Shokin's investigation into the gas company was targeting Hunter Biden, something else that President Trump has falsely claimed.
Because Hunter Biden was involved with Burisma, and of course his father, the Vice President Biden at the time, oversaw Ukraine affairs for the White House. This is why.
And there's nobody... Well, you've had a lot of time. Isn't this something you want to get to the bottom of?
No, because I trust my son.
But that doesn't pass the smell test. Like when you're vice president, isn't there a higher standard? Don't you need to know what's happening with your family? Don't you need to put down some guardrails?
Unless there was something that was, there was something on its face that was wrong. There's nothing on its face that was wrong. So look, if you want to talk about problems, you know, let's talk about Trump's family. I mean, come on. This is, these guys are amazing.
So you think that everything that happened was kosher?
You know there's not one single bit of evidence, not one little tiny bit, to suggest anything done was wrong.
Well, you have uncovered so much for the public to understand here. You've told us that 9 family members were receiving wire payments, money.
You know there's not one single bit of evidence, not one little tiny bit.
You've told us that you've been able to identify $20 million at least of money taken in.
Not one little tiny bit.
Can you identify where this money was going? Are these all domestic accounts, or was there money overseas as well?
There are some bank records that we believe will tell a big story about what level of involvement not only Joe had with the business schemes, but how he benefited from the business schemes. So the Biden attorneys know exactly where we're headed with this investigation. They have lawyered up. I mean, they are building Fort Knox around these bank accounts.
Not one little tiny bit to suggest anything done was wrong.
Combine Shokin's statements that we heard throughout Brian Kilmeade's interview with him with the documents from the Obama administration themselves that state unequivocally they thought, Barack Obama and his team thought Viktor Shokin was doing a great job rooting out corruption. And don't you have all the proof that you need that Joe Biden altered American foreign policy because he and his family were getting paid?
I know what I'm up against. I know what I'm up against, a serial abuser. That's what this guy is. He abuses power everywhere he can. If he sees any threat to his staying in power, he'll do whatever he has to do. But this crosses the line.
The president continues to deny he had any knowledge or involvement in his son's overseas business deals, despite mounting evidence and testimony to the contrary.
Do you believe they were up to no good? Were they up to doing something corrupt with Burisma? Was the company of Burisma corrupt, as been alleged?
Yes, to answer your question, there's no doubt in my mind that Burisma was engaged in illegal activities.
So let's dig into these unproven claims that Trump is making about the former vice president.
We don't even know to what extent the company was being investigated. Bloomberg, for example, has reported the investigation was dormant at the time that Biden applied his pressure. Number 2 is that there's no evidence that Hunter Biden himself was ever under investigation. And the third problem is that it's not at all clear that getting rid of this prosecutor would have helped Biden.
This is the thing that President Donald Trump wanted to be investigated, and this is the reason why he is right now being impeached in the American Congress.
So what Donald Trump, when he got into power, they first tried to launch this Russia collusion hoax on him, and it had to be thrown away because there was no proof. And as much as they tried to make it stick, the media, the Democrats in Congress, they couldn't. If Joe Biden is arranging and fixing problems for his son, who's involved in the middle of massive corruption that threatens the energy complex and the stability of a weak nation that is also under Russian threat, this is a major era of international corruption that Trump has a mandate to go after. So what Adam Schiff, who's leading this out of the House Intel Committee instead of the Judiciary Committee, was suggesting was there was a quid pro quo, that he was saying, do me a favor, investigate my opponent's corruption. This is somewhat ridiculous because when we're giving huge amounts of aid to a country like Ukraine, Trump has a responsibility to protect the taxpayer. And in fact, under Joe Biden, they withheld aid, and he bragged about it in the Council of Foreign Relations that they were going to withhold aid until they fired a prosecutor who was looking into this very corruption in Burisma and into Hunter Biden. So
Matthew,
that was serious quid pro quo.
It looks like a
third world. Which is
why
amazing.
Donald Trump is being impeached on this case and not
Well,
Joe
it's all,
Biden being
look,
prosecuted.
you
for
comment
example.
on politics for a living. It's all kabuki. They drummed up something that they could try and create into something it's not. That's what they've been doing for years. They want to negate this presidency. Trump's doing his job. The corruption in this stinks. Hunter Biden's got big legal problems. Devin Archer, their other partners, had big legal problems. There have been sanctions on this company that when Biden was vice president, he was able to try and reverse the sanctions.
So So
this is total
why
cronyism.
Donald Trump is being
And
impeached?
Kwasniewski is still on the board of this company, as bad and obviously corrupt and non-compliant as this company is. He's still on the board.
And that's a very dishonest thing. I am your voice.
Much of the media in this country is not just fake, it's corrupt.